Today we'll be looking at a 9th generation Honda Civic Si. Don't forget to check the video description. I'll have links to everything that I'm using, and if you want to go to different sections of the tune-up, you can click on the links in there as well. Alright, now it's time to jack the vehicle up. So we're going to use a Daytona 3-ton low-profile long-reach jack. This thing is great, gets under low cars, and raises pretty high. So here's the lever to pop the hood. Make sure your emergency brake is on and your manual transmission is in A gear. Right above the Honda symbol in the front, you'll find a latch to open the hood. Make sure to secure it with the bar. And in front of the engine and between the front, if you look down and you use a nice light, you'll see an arrow. And it's not at the edge of the arrow, but you see the gap and then there's a metal piece or metal bar. That's where we'll be jacking the vehicle up in the front. So let's get on the ground so I can show you, but I like to use the Magic Creeper. It's a slidey sort of pad. It makes it easy to move around on the ground when you haven't put the vehicle up on jack stands yet. And so here is the jacking point underneath the front of the car. I'll back out just so you can get some perspective here. And we zoom in, you see how it kind of has like a hump and it has some holes in it. And there's me pointing at it with my Braun mechanic light. That's where we're gonna jack the car up in the front. And so we're just gonna slide the Daytona in, and you kind of have to eyeball it. It's never straightforward on positioning with jacks, but you just sort of eyeball it and try to match it up so it's underneath the jacking point. And the great thing about this jack is it has foot pedals. And if you're strong enough, you can just sort of push down on it and you can raise it up so it's in the perfect position for jacking up your car. I really like that about this Daytona jack. There's tons of other brands out there that do the same thing. So you're going to put your jack stands behind the wheels, and those are the notches or the jacking points. And put both of them on either side and make sure to chock your wheels. So you've chocked your wheels, emergency brake is on, and the manual transmission car is in a gear. You can use your foot to try to get the vehicle up as far as you can with the pedal, but then you're going to have to yank on the bar at some point. You see how I've angled my US jack underneath those notches, the jacking points, to be sort of above the valley of the jack. And you see the back is already really low, so we're just going to get the front of the car on the jack stand. No notches, just on the jack stands. And we're going to lower it nice and slow. Whenever we do this, we always check the jacks visually, make sure that they're in the valleys, and we shake. We shake the car, make sure that it's stationary, it doesn't move. It needs to sit nicely. Jack there, line it up. You can use the foot pedal on your jack. And then again, put your jack stands in the proper location. And then we jack the vehicle up. Ideally, you have the garage door open if you're working in the garage there. And slide your jack stand in. Again, we're sort of angling it to be right underneath those notches into the valley of the US jacks. And then you lower it. And again, whenever we do this, we always shake the vehicle, okay? It may make some noise as it's settling, but definitely do not get under a vehicle until you have secured it properly. Now this is a Daystar jack riser, I guess you'd call it. Some people just use hockey pucks, but this thing is nice because it actually sits pretty snug on this jack. It's the larger of the two sizes, depending on what jack you buy. And it's not going to fall off, and it has a nice little groove to not damage the vehicle. And now that I can use this Daystar, I can put it under the tow hook, which lines up perfectly. And it gives me an additional 5 inches on a jack that already gives me something like 22 inches of height. And so as you can see, we're going to get it up to 3 notches first, and we do the front, we do the back, until we get up to 6 notches all around. And again, I'm just showing you the jacking point on the back and where you put the Daystar to give you the maximum height. I wouldn't go above 6 notches on any jack, that's just me. At that point, if you really have to get your car that high, you should consider a different alternative like an actual lift. As you can see, these notches are securely in the valleys, of our US jack stands, which I think are the best jack stands available. If you're going to spend money on jacks, get a high quality one, make sure the car's level, and of course, shake all corners, make sure it is stable. Tire rotation and inspection. So I like to use impact guns, and I use the Ryobi impact gun. It's a 1/2 inch. And I use a Mechanic rolling creeper stool, and it's really nice. It has tons of storage for pretty much most of my tools, like if I'm working on brakes or whatever. It also has a holster for your impact gun, which is kind of nice. Definitely remember to remove your battery before you do that. But the casters on it are decent. It moves pretty freely, and for tall people with long legs, it's like the only one. Definitely use some latex gloves that are 8mm and get extra large size if you get these in Feed Touch. I have a 19mm Tecton, and I'm just gonna add this to the 1/2 inch impact gun here. You see where the bead matches up with the hole? Just sort of snaps into place. And then you're good to go. Make sure that the setting is on 3 loosen, okay? You'd never want to tighten on 3. And then here's the battery. You can check to see how much juice it has before you put it in. And don't ever add the battery until you are ready to use it, and take it out when you're done. Don't just leave it in the gun. It's a safety issue and just kind of wasteful. So as you can see, it is loosening. And so then we just sort of match up with our lug nut here, and you can kind of move it like that, like twist it to make sure it's nicely seated on that lug nut. And then you just take them off. And don't forget to save the lug nut. It doesn't matter what pattern you go in when you loosen, so I just go in a circle and remove all of them. But be careful, do not let the tire fall down when you loosen the last one, like that. So just be careful not to drop it, that would be bad. And of course, before you put your gun in the holster, remove the battery. So put your leg underneath the tire and lift while also holding with your hands, and bend your knees. You don't want to hurt your back. And then you're going to roll the tire to inspect to see if there's any damage, like nails or screws. And I do see some damage there. That needs to be plugged. It's a nail. So we're going to rotate this tire to the front right hand side of the car. We'll put them on later. It's time to service the front calipers. Throughout this video, you'll see me using the Braun mechanic light. I'm going to use a 12mm socket here, and I've got a Tecton swivel ratchet set, which is really nice. You turn it to loosen it, and the other way to tighten it. Typically put the socket right on the bolt for the caliper there, and then I just hammer it with my hand. Now, if I can't loosen it that way, which usually you can on these, the caliper bolts, I'll use this actual rubber mallet just to break it. And once it breaks like that, then I just use the swivel and loosen it. Don't remove the bolt entirely. You're going to want to make sure you break and loosen the bottom one before you take it completely off. Then you should hand loosen it. And don't lose these bolts. They're easy to replace. You could just go to like Honda Parts or whatever, even Amazon, and get replacement bolts. But typically they don't strip unless people are using tools on these bolts that they should not be. So now we're just gonna grab the caliper itself and we're just gonna wiggle it off, kind of like a upward downward wiggle while you pull it away from the rotor. And there's a lot of mud here. I try to hold the pads on just so it doesn't like fall down immediately from those pins that are in there. And then I put the caliper up behind the rotor temporarily just so it doesn't hang by the brake line. And I will pull the pins off, or spreaders, whichever you want to call them. And I save them because I want to make sure I match them to my new brake pads that have spreader pins. And then you just pull the pads off. I mean, as you can see, this is super dirty. The pads are not horrible, but I'm going to replace them. And you clean with Simple Green. It's all-purpose cleaner. It's great. And I use the Blue Shop towels to get all this mud off. And there's a lot of mud to clean off. I know this car went to a garage beforehand, and they supposedly fixed some issues. Guess I shouldn't expect them to clean things, but man, look at the difference some simple green makes on these calipers. I wouldn't eat off them, but... And so now I'm going to take a 17mm socket, and I'm going to put it on this 1/2 inch swivel ratchet set, which is great by Tecton. I recommend it. It's super useful. And we'll have that on loosen. It's going to be a little hard to see these bracket bolts, and you're definitely going to need to use a hammer on this because they're, I think, 80 foot-pounds tightened. So yeah, you're going to need to use a hammer to break these. And again, it's sort of the same routine. You want to loosen it until you can hand loosen, and then you take them off. Don't lose the bolts. And once you take the bottom one off, you'll see that the bracket itself can just come right off, and you're going to want to slide it off. In this case, we're replacing the rotors. But you can see how dirty this is. It's covered in mud. We're going to simple green this and get it back in working order. But you're going to take these old clips off, and you can just try to pop them off like I do, or you can use a screwdriver, flathead. And see, it's pretty easy to take off. Make sure you save them because you want to compare them with your new clips. As you can see, some simple green really makes this thing look better. Brake clean, brake part cleaner. You're going to want to use this for sure. Just sort of spray it in the areas where the clips were. And what I typically do after I spray is I just let it air dry because you don't want to, inhale this crap. Then you can use a steel brush and just try to get it as clean as possible. You want the contacts to be clean, no, rust, no dust. And there you go. I mean, it's pretty clean. It's going to take the new clips easily. Lubricate front caliper pins. All right, so now we're going to pull these pins out, and you just sort of twist and pull, but then at the same time, take your other hand, pinch on the upper lip, and then twist, pull. And usually this works. Sometimes they are really in there, but that is the method I almost always use on vehicles, and it, 9 out of 10 times will work. Then you're going to pull the boot itself off and pinch at the bottom, and then just sort of rotate in a circle until it comes off. Again, they can be really on there, but that's the strategy that I use, and it works mostly. We're going to clean that out too with a blue shop towel. So you just sort of pull these pins out in the same manner. You can lay them on the ground, and you can lay these boots on the ground too. It's the same tactic. So now you're going to twist up that blue shop towel and stick it in there and spin it. You're not going to get this super clean or anything, but the less old grease that's not effective anymore you get out, the better your braking system will work. If you want those caliper pins to move smoothly, they should glide. That's why they're called glide pins. So the more crap you get out, the better. I use a little simple green just to get some of the excess gunk loosen it up. And then you're going to use the same blue shop towel, twist it. You can put it on the inside of the boot and spin it as well. So as clean as you can get these components, the better the braking system works. So now we're just going to put one end of the boot in, and then we're going to use our other finger to pinch down the other side. Once you've done that, you're going to put your finger inside the boot, and I'll show you, and push down evenly all along the edges. And you can tell that it's in when you lift up the boot, and you see that the bottom part is fully seated there. It's not lifting up. You can even pull on the top if you want, and it's in there. Now for the pins themselves, again, blue shop towel, you're going to spin the pin as you pull back on it. And I do this about 3 times just to get all the excess grease off. I know a lot of folks don't spend a lot of time degreasing their pins. Sometimes they don't degrease them at all until the brake pads need to be changed. I do not recommend that. You should, as part of your yearly service, definitely clean the pins off at a minimum, even if you don't clean the boots off. but at a minimum, clear the grease off of the pin and put new grease on yearly. So you definitely want to make sure these pins are gliding like they should, and re-grease your pins every year, whether or not you need new brake pads. Now we're going to put some Permatex. This is silicone ceramic extreme brake part lubricant. It can handle temperatures up to 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit. For any performance or sports car that relies on power stopping brakes, definitely use the orange stuff. If you're a daily driver, you got a Toyota Camry, you're not super, high performance, you can use the clear 3M silicone paste. It's going to be fine. However, I always use the orange stuff, and I'll show you why. I think that it's better for maintenance to use it because you can detect if there are holes in your caliper boots much easier, because the orange will pop right through any holes that are in the caliper boots. Can you just use the 3M stuff? Be more careful about examining it? Sure. Realistically, if you're in a garage, you don't have the best lighting, it's not an ideal situation. It's a heck of a lot easier to see orange popping through a boot than clear, right? And so we're going to put the pin in a twisting fashion. You see how I pushed it in and twisted it? Gives a nice even distribution throughout the boot. Then I pull up and down just to make sure that the pin is moving freely as I'd expect it to. And clean off that excess orange goop just to make sure there are no holes when you do your test. You don't want any holes in your boots. If you have any holes in your boots, you need to replace them. You need to replace those boots when you find any damage on them because it depressurizes the system. It means that the glide pins don't glide effectively anymore, and it means that your brakes don't work as effectively anymore. And again, really nothing is more important than your brake system working. So now we're going to put this bottom one in, and I was just showing you the orientation against the rotor. Again, push it in and twist. I'm testing, this is both testing the glidiness of the caliper pin, while also testing if there are any holes in the boot. You would see orange goop coming out of the holes if there were holes in it. And as you can see, they move nice and freely. That's what you want. Replace front rotors. So you're going to want to hang up your calipers, and I usually will put it on the strut or on a metal piece around the strut. You just hang it right there. Anywhere is fine, just as long as it's on a permanent metal part of the structure. And you just don't want it hanging from the brake line. That is a big no-no. So then we're going to grab a Phillips screwdriver. You can try to loosen these two screws. It's not going to happen because the inertia of the wheel turning will tighten them beyond your ability to loosen. So you're going to need an impact screwdriver. This is a power-built one I like, and it's pretty straightforward. First thing you do is you test it by pushing it against the rotor to make sure that it is on a loosened setting. Going to have a bad day if it's on a tightened setting. And once you've figured that out, you put it into the screw, you take a mallet, a rubber mallet, and you just strike the back of it until you see the screw move, and you saw it move there. Then you stop hitting it once you see the screw move, and then use your Phillips screwdriver to loosen it. But don't remove the screw entirely, just get it loosened. And then to make your life easier, you can flip the rotor upside down, or basically just move it to the top, move the screw to the top, and then rinse and repeat. Make sure that the impact screwdriver is in there nicely, and you're going to hit it until it moves. Pay attention to the screw moving. And then stop. You see that it moved? Stop hitting it. So then you're just going to loosen it like so, and make sure you don't lose those screws. Next up is to remove the rotor. You're just going to grab the left and the right side of the rotor and just sort of pull in opposing directions, up, down, left, right, and it'll come right off. So we're going to use some brake clean. Spray it down, just really douse it with this stuff, and then let it air dry. You don't want to inhale this, it's toxic. Once it's air dried enough, you're going to take a blue shop towel and wipe it down just to get rid of as much of the mud and brake dust and grease and rust and all that stuff as you possibly can before you start working on it. And once you're happy with that initial wipe down, you're going to spray it one more time, and then you're going to use a steel brush. And the steel brush is basically like removing plaque from your teeth. You're removing the brake dust, any rust, and getting a really clean surface for your brand new rotor to sit on nicely. So we're going to use some Element 3 rotors. They're zinc coated. Here is the part number if you want it. But they come straight from the factory with some oil on them, some grease on them to protect them from rusting. And what you're going to do is you're just going to, again, brake clean, spray the top and the bottom of the rotor. Make sure that it air dries before you pick it up. Do not hurt your lungs. And then use a blue shop towel and wipe it down. You want to remove all of the oil and all of the grease from the rotors because the brake pads make contact with the rotors and they cannot have any grease or any oil on them. Otherwise they will slide. And when brake pads are not clinging to the rotor as they should, it means you aren't stopping as you should. So make sure it is super clean. And look, it is very clean. Look at that. So then we're just going to slide the rotor on, and if it does not immediately fit, you just go ahead and return these. And I like to put the screw in on the bottom first, like so. Oh, you don't have to really tighten these very much because the inertia of the wheels turning will automatically tighten these screws. And then just put the top one in, same sort of procedure. Tighten them, but do not kill your hand trying to tighten them. You're wasting your time. And finally, use some brake clean, just in case you got some oil on the surface while you were putting it on. Coat it, let it air dry, and wipe that bad boy down. It is ready for your brake pads. Replace front brake pads. So this is a hybrid brake pad. It's both semi-metallic for good stopping and ceramic to reduce noise. Now I took the pads and the clips off for you just so I can show you that you need to compare your new pads and clips to your old ones. If they don't match, they don't look like they fit, go ahead and return them. Don't waste your time trying to put them on. So we're looking at the bracket right now, the caliper bracket from the side view, and I feel this is always the easiest way to put clips on, because then you get a really good idea of how these things will or will not fit. And you can use your hands to just slide them in like so. Sometimes you have to use a screwdriver to sort of bang them in. But if you can tell from the side that it's not going to fit from the get-go, just go ahead and return those parts. They're never going to fit. Usually just slide them on like this, apply a little pressure, and they should just pop right in. So now we're going to take the bracket and we're going to put it on. And you're going to take those bolts and you're going to hand tighten them in first. I usually do the top one first. It's a 17 millimeter. And we're going to use a torque wrench at 80 foot-pounds. You probably can't see that. But yeah, we're going to use a 17 millimeter at 80 foot-pounds. Tighten it until you hear a click. Once you hear a click, it's reached 80 foot-pounds. You're done. Do the top one and the bottom one. Now, some people will use Loctite on these. I think it depends on the vehicle. Some vehicles require Loctite on the bracket bolts. If you feel more comfortable using it, that's up to you. I typically won't do it unless it's in the manual. So then we're going to take the brake caliper off of the strut where it was sitting, and we're going to take a bolt, and in the top one, we're going to add the bolt. Always start by just hand tightening it. And then you're going to use a 12 millimeter here, and we're going to tighten it up so that it's on there enough to hold the brake caliper if we move it up and down, using that nice Tecton ratchet. If it spins on you, you're going to need another wrench to hold it down, but this one isn't spinning. And see, now you can easily open it up. So this is a brake piston tool where you just take an old brake pad and you put it in front and then you crank it to the right. And what it will do is it'll safely push the piston back in. You want to make sure that the piston is fully back in before you work on brakes, or you're going to have a bad time. Do not push the piston in with pliers. It will damage things. It's a bad idea, okay? This is cheap. Just buy it, use an old brake pad. There's no reason to not use this tool. Clean off around the piston and around that area. Just make sure that it's nice and clean. Then you can lower the brake caliper again. And use that same tool that you used on the strut to hold the brake caliper up. Use it to hold it open for you so that you don't run the risk of it falling on your hands when you're trying to put the brake pads in. Again, you're going to use Permatex. I was trained to put it on all contact points. Some people only put it on the back. Some people only put it on the ears. I put it on the ears and the back. It's the way I've been taught, and I'm always pretty generous with my grease. Everyone's going to be different. They're going to say use less grease, only grease the ears, only grease the back. One other tip that I'd give you is always try putting the brake pads in before you grease, or you're going to have a bad time. Make sure that you can get the brake pads in before you've added any grease, so that when you've added the grease, because it's going to be harder once the grease is on, you know what to do. The indicator here for when the brake pads are low should always be on the leading edge and on the inside. And what that does, it allows you to hear it more often and more loudly than if it was downward facing. We're doing the ears and we're doing the backs. Don't worry about the amount of grease that seems to be spilling over here. I always clean up the pads and I make sure that there's no grease on the pads themselves. Make sure you never have grease on the pads. That's super important. Obviously, that will impact its ability to stop. So make sure that's clean. Then you just slide them in. Next step is to pinch the pads, and then you're going to put the spreaders in one at a time. Always put a spreader in one hole and then pinch the other side of the spreader to put it into the other hole. It's a little challenging to do, especially when you've got grease. Always keep that pinch on the pads or they'll fly off because the spreaders are constantly forcing the pads in the other direction. Then you're going to want to push in the caliper pin on the bottom so that the brake caliper will fully seat. And then you're going to put the bolt in, again, hand tighten. Never just immediately go to a ratchet on anything. Always hand tighten first to make sure you've got a good threading there. And then you're going to tighten these caliper bolts. Do not bother with a torque wrench. I've never seen a mechanic use a torque wrench on these caliper bolts. Service rear calipers. So first thing to do is to take the emergency brake off. If you don't, you can't get the calipers off. We're going to use a 12 millimeter with our Tecton ratchet. And for these, usually there's just not enough to require like a mallet. You can just sort of use all your strength and get it off. If you're not able to, you can just bang on it with your arm. But usually these ones in the back, they're not tightened too bad. But if, for whatever reason you can't get it off, just sort of bang on it with your arm or use a mallet. And then just hand loosen them. Make sure you don't lose those bolts. Next, we're going to remove a bolt that holds down the brake line. So what we're going to do is we're going to use the same 12 millimeter. And since this is a nice swivel ratchet, it'll allow us to swivel the head of the ratchet in such a way to give us a cool angle. And angles are really important, especially when dealing with tight spots like this. And so we can easily put that in there, swivel the head, and loosen it. give it a little bit of strength there, and then you see you can just easily spin it like so. Keep that bolt as well. So there's 3 bolts to be concerned with here. 1 for the brake line and 2 for the caliper pin bolts. But right now, let's pull off the brake caliper, and you just sort of wiggle it up and down. And as you can see, this is super dirty. So we're gonna have to clean this. Make sure that you hang this properly from a strut or a metal part of the inside of the wheel well, and remove this clip in the back. It's really dirty. I'm going to use my same system just so this thing isn't hanging from the brake line. There we go. So now I'm not too worried about it. And now it's time to clean it. And again, it's simple green. Get that as clean as you can. I mean, this is really, really dirty. So now we're going to use a 14 millimeter to get the top and bottom bracket bolts off of the bracket. This probably will need a mallet. If you're super strong, maybe not, but for me, I always end up using a mallet on bracket bolts. I might get lucky. Nope. I'm gonna have to use a mallet here too. Use the ratchet to a point where you can hand loosen, and then hand loosen those off. Always use gloves, especially for the dirty parts. So this should just come right off. The brake pads may fall off, but in this case they didn't. You can just sort of peel those off once you get the bracket off. The pads themselves were not horrible. They weren't like hitting metal or anything, but if we're doing a rotor, we're going to do the pads too, and we're doing brand new rotors, so brand new pads. As you can see, I cleaned the bracket. It's, you know, pretty clean. Definitely doesn't have any mud on it anymore. Lubricate rear caliper pins. So you guys remember the drill. We're going to pull the pins out, twisting as we do. And this one was a little tough to get out. So, oh, and this one's even harder to get out. This is not a good sign. It means that they didn't grease these pins properly. The boots may be deteriorated, so we'll check that out. And we pinch and pull on these boots. They should be tough to get out, but that was too easy. So that probably is going to be replaced boots on this caliper bracket. And that one was a little tougher, but if you do one, you should do both. So get a blue shop towel and twist it on the inside of the bracket to get it clean. And you can try doing it on these boots as well. If you're going to save them, I think I'm going to replace these. And for the bolt, just like last time, you pinch and you spin until it comes out nice and shiny. Maybe just do this once or twice and it'll come out shiny. But if someone doesn't do this frequently, you may have to do like several passes just to get it to come out clean. All right, so bracket's all clean. Now we're gonna try to put in these old boots, but I can tell you already that these are really falling apart. They are on their last legs. So the braking system is so important. And this, I mean, this looks like it's falling apart right now. I can see a hole. So we're just gonna replace it. And here's some Carlson. There's the part number if you want it. They're just boots. So they're boots for your caliper brackets. They're so cheap, there's no reason to not have extras. If you own vehicles, definitely buy these, because if you do your brakes, you're gonna wanna have them around. But basically you put one lip in and then you force the other lip in with a finger and you put your thumb on the inside of the boot and you spin it around in a circle and pull to test to make sure it's in. So here on the second one, just to show you step by step, you put one lip in. You start one lip in and then you force the other lip in with your finger. Once you've done that, you put the thumb on the inside of the boot, push down and spin in a circle. And this really seats the boot inside of the bracket and pull to test. So we're doing Permatex again, the 3000 degree Fahrenheit performance silicone ceramic grease. We're gonna grease this up nicely. It looked like the rear bolts were not greased or hadn't been greased in a long time. So we push it in and we twist to give a nice even distribution of grease. And the boot should just pop on like so. It shouldn't, you know, be forced. And we'll do the second one. And again, push, twist, and then you'll see that the boot should just pop over the edge of the pin, giving a nice seal. Then the blue shop towel is used to get all the orange grease off the top that probably came out. It just cleans it up a little bit. And then we're going to do some tests of just pulling up and down, maybe twisting as well. So this tests the ability of the glide pins to glide or slide. And then if you twist like this, if you were to do that with the old boots, they'd probably tear. That's why new boots are a good idea. Replace rear rotors. So again, guys, we're going to be using the power-built impact screwdriver, and we're just going to use a rubber mallet. We're going to loosen those screws enough until we see them move. Once we see them move, we can pull this out. Regular Phillips screwdriver to loosen those screws. Now, if you're in the north, you may have to use a little silicone grease on these screws just to get them to move. But if you're not in a region where there's a lot of salt on the roads and rust, then this is probably enough. Go ahead and wiggle the old rotor off. You're going to dispose of those properly. Use the brake clean. Just fully saturate the whole area. This just helps with getting all of the brake dust off and gunk. Do not breathe this stuff in. It's toxic, so spray, walk away, let it air dry, come back, and then use that steel brush to get that excess brake grease and brake dust off. And remember, you know, we're doing this so that the rotor can really sit flush. I'm using the Element 3s. This is the part number in case you guys want to use this. If you are able to use the brake clean on it just to get the factory gunk off of the rotors front and back, just slide the rotor on like so. And then you're going to grab those two screws that you were using earlier, and you're just going to tighten them enough to keep the rotor on. Remember that the inertia of the wheels turning will automatically tighten those screws on the rotors, and those screws on the rotors are really just intended to keep the rotor on. So again, don't over tighten. You're just going to tighten it enough to keep it on. So finally, we're going to use some brake clean, and this is if you didn't use gloves when you're putting the rotors on. Wipe it down with the blue shop towel, and you're done. Replace rear brake pads. So in order to do the brake pads, we have to push the piston in. So you can buy one of these compression caliper tool sets, and I'm going to use the A version on this set, which will fit this particular vehicle. And you also have this brake pad looking tool, which you will fit over the L portion of your compression tool, and it sits at the bottom like so. So then you're going to fit it in so the grooves match up with that cross, and tighten it as tight as you can so it's really in the grooves, and then you're going to turn it. Now as you turn it, it's definitely hard to do, but as you turn it, you're going to have to tighten this portion of the tool, you see, so that you can keep those nodules in the grooves. And you're going to repeat this process until the piston is completely in. But these tools are very useful, and they're better than pliers because pliers can damage the piston, which is not good. Clean off this bracket. Use the steel brush again just to get all that brake dust off and make sure we have a nice clean surface. I like to use a screwdriver just to make sure that those clips are nicely seated in there. Kind of tap on it just to make sure they don't pop out or anything weird. I'm just using a regular Phillips screwdriver. So everything looks clean, and I'm comparing the old clips to the new ones just to make sure that what I bought will actually fit. And then you put that in while bending it. It's a little awkward, but that's an important thing to get right. And then finally, we're going to put the bracket on, like so. And we're going to add our bracket bolt, our top and our bottom. Then we're going to use our wonderful Tecton. Make sure that we use the proper torque specs here for the torque wrench. And we basically just go until you click. I usually do it twice just to make sure, since the bracket's so important, you want to make sure that doesn't move, doesn't come off. Some people use Loctite. It's not required for this vehicle. Some American vehicles actually do require Loctite on the bracket bolts. It's on the top and the bottom, and you should be done. Next, we're going to take some Permatex and we will dress up the back of the brake pad, just like we've done with the others. I usually put more on there than others do. I just want to make sure that my brakes can move freely, they don't get stuck. And since I check my brake pads every year as part of my routine maintenance, so I'm always in there once a year, re-greasing, cleaning off old grease. To slide it in, it's always difficult sliding these things in. My advice is try doing it before you grease up the pads, but you can get them in, trust me. It takes a little bit of practice, and each brake pad is a little different, which is fun. I'm just going to take some pliers just to make sure that it's in the perfect arrangement for the nodules on the brake pads. You want to make sure that they are aligned. So you want to make sure that piston is aligned with the nodules on the brake pad. Basically the cross in there, you want to make sure it matches with the nodules in the brake pad. And then we're just going to clean off a little bit of that grease off our gloves, and we're going to put the caliper back on. Finally, we're going to put in the caliper bolt. And put the bottom one in. We're just going to hand tighten it first. Make sure that those are both snug. I don't use torque wrenches on these glide pins. And once they're hand tight, then we're going to switch over to our Tecton ratchet. And if it spins on you, which this one appears to be spinning with my 12mm socket, you're going to want to use a secondary wrench here to hold it in place. So as I hold it in place, I'm tightening it. All right, finally we're going to take that brake line that we took off earlier, and we're going to make sure that we have that properly on there. Again, we're going to use this Tecton with a 12mm. Garage lighting and torque rotated tires. So everybody should have garage lighting at this point. It's so cheap and easy. What we're going to do is we're going to put the tires on, and I always put them on by turning around and lifting with the back of my leg while I add a lug nut to the top and to the bottom to secure it. Once it's secure enough to walk away and remove my leg, I'll then get on my mechanic roller and I'll use an impact driver. Again, we're going to use the 19mm. This is an impact socket, and we're going to put it on setting 2. It's roughly 80 foot-pounds. If you're not comfortable using this, you might have to tighten it while it's on the ground, which takes a lot longer. So I will use this on all 5 of the lug nuts and do it on all 4 tires. Then once it's on the ground, I'll tighten it by hand with the torque wrench. Next, we're going to lower the vehicle. Follow the steps at the beginning of the video that demonstrated jacking the vehicle up and using jack stands, but just go in reverse. To make sure that the engine is in gear with the emergency brake on, the wheels chalked. You don't want to skip any safety steps here. Then we're going to use a torque wrench with a 19 millimeter. Now we're going to tighten the lug nuts in a star pattern and make sure you do all 4 tires. Then we're going to use this nice Ryobi tool to inflate the tires to 32 psi. Step, I like to put on new caps. If you have these crummy plastic ones, it's not much money to upgrade to these chrome caps.